A century-old betrayal was buried beneath Pine Hollow, hidden by those in power who chose silence over justice. Mayor Linda Carter's warning revealed how deep the fear of truth ran in the town's heart. But John Mercer and his loyal dog Duke refused to let history stay buried, uncovering a secret that shook the whole community. Just wait until you hear how their discovery not only shattered the town, but brought justice and healing in a way no one expected. John Mercer moved through the mist like a man carrying a weight no one could see. At 38, he had returned to Pine Hollow, a small Appalachian town tucked between weathered hills and endless pine forests. The years he had spent overseas were stitched into him like invisible scars. Nights haunted by echoes of far-off battlefields, days spent wrestling with the silence that followed. His homecoming had not been triumphant. It was quiet, too quiet. His only constant companion was Duke, a tall, steady German shepherd with eyes that seemed to know too much. Duke wasn't just a dog, he was a bond, a reminder of friendship and sacrifice. John had been given him by a fellow Marine who never made it back home. That gift had become a lifeline. Wherever John went, Duke followed. Wherever John wandered, Duke stayed close. That morning was gray and heavy with rain. Clouds hung low, blotting out the sun. The forest seemed to hold its breath, each raindrop muffling sound, turning the world into a softened, wet hush. John zipped his jacket tighter, feeling the cool moisture seep into his skin. He walked a narrow, forgotten trail, the ground dark with mud, the air thick with pine scent. Duke padded beside him, ears alert. They had been walking for nearly an hour when something caught John's eye. Between two moss-covered trees, half hidden by brambles and fallen branches, lay the ruins of a cabin. It was a strange thing. The wood collapsed inward, beams splintered and soaked, roof caved in, as if the structure had surrendered to time. But the oddest part was that John had never seen it before. He knew every inch of these woods, every old path. Yet this cabin wasn't on any map he owned, and no one in town seemed to recall its existence. Duke stopped and sniffed the air, low growl rumbling in his throat. John crouched at the edge of the wreckage, brushing rain from his brow. Something shimmered beneath the rotting timbers. The gleam was faint at first, but it drew him closer, an unnatural gleam in the shadows of decay. John's fingers worked instinctively. He tugged at the warped wood, prying splintered planks away with steady hands. His boots slipped in the mud as he shifted weight over the wreckage. Finally, with a groan of effort, he uncovered a large, weather-beaten metal chest. Its surface was rusted, worn by years of exposure, but it still carried an air of mystery, as though it had been placed here for a purpose no one was meant to uncover. The chest was wrapped in oilskin, yellowed and cracked, smelling faintly of earth and rain. John's breath caught. He didn't know why, but something in that moment felt important, like stepping into a story that had been waiting for him. Duke stayed close, pressing his nose against the chest, his tail stiff. John hesitated. His mind raced with questions. Whose chest was this? How had it been hidden here for who knew how long? And most of all, what was inside? The rain intensified, drumming a soft but steady rhythm on the leaves above them. John glanced toward the trees. No one was there. Just him, Duke, and the remnants of a forgotten shelter, shrouded in fog. His chest tightened, part curiosity, part unease. He reached for the oilskin, his hands brushing against the rough fabric. Underneath lay something heavier, something solid. He realized then this was not an ordinary discovery. This chest was more than lost property. Somewhere in the wood and rust lay a story, a secret, and whatever it was could change everything he thought he knew about Pine Hollow. John took a deep breath and began to undo the oilskin. Duke's low growl turned into a quiet whine, as if warning him. But John felt a strange certainty. This wasn't an accident. The rain was falling harder now, but the sound of it faded in his mind. All he could hear was the slow, deliberate rustle of the wrapping, and the pounding of something inside him that told him he had found something that would not be forgotten. The oilskin slipped away under John Mercer's fingers, the damp fabric whispering softly as it came free. Inside the chest lay a bundle of treasures that seemed older than the forest itself: brittle paper, faded photographs, and a collection of leather-bound notebooks stained by time. The smell of old ink and dust rose in the air, mingling with the scent of rain and rotting wood. John felt the weight of it immediately, not just in his hands, but in his chest. He set Duke down beside him and carefully lifted the first bundle of documents. The top piece was a diary, its leather cover cracked and soft. Opening it revealed handwriting so fine and deliberate it almost felt like a confession. Page after page held the words of someone consumed by purpose and fear. John worked slowly, mindful of the fragile paper. Beneath the diary lay stacks of yellowed letters, tied with faded ribbon. Maps fell out with them, edges curled and brittle. The letters were addressed to names John did not recognize, but one thing became painfully clear. They told the story of Samuel Caldwell, a miner who had lived in Pine Hollow more than a century ago. Caldwell's handwriting described a discovery that could have changed the town forever: a vein of gold hidden deep beneath the earth. But the tone of Caldwell's words grew darker as John read. The letters told of betrayal. The town leaders of the time had learned of Caldwell's find and had moved to bury it. Caldwell's plans, his maps, his hopes, all erased. He had been silenced, his discovery lost to history. Caldwell's last words in the diary were a plea that someday the truth would be found and justice restored. John leaned back against the wet earth, the chest heavy beside him. His fingers trembled as he closed the diary. There was something in Caldwell's story that struck deep. It wasn't just about gold. It was about trust broken, about someone who had fought and sacrificed, only to be betrayed by those he trusted most. John understood that pain. Not the pain of betrayal by strangers, but the slow, gnawing ache of being abandoned by the system you gave your life to protect. He had lived years believing that serving his country meant something. Yet, when he returned home, the honors felt hollow. The help was absent, the sacrifices forgotten. And now, here in the damp forest, he was holding proof of another man's betrayal, buried under time, but not gone. A wave of compassion rose in him, so strong it made his chest ache. This chest, this collection of letters and maps, was more than a relic. It was a voice from the past asking to be heard. It was proof that injustice could be hidden, but never erased entirely. John looked down at Duke, who rested his head on his owner's knee, his dark eyes filled with quiet patience. He imagined Caldwell sitting here in the forest, maybe with a dog of his own, feeling the weight of being unheard. The thought struck John harder than the rain, but compassion came with a burden. John knew that if he brought this chest into the light, the truth would not be simple. It could bring healing, but it could also bring pain. Decades-old secrets could fracture families. Names carved into Pine Hollow's history might crumble. And for John himself, there was risk. He had no allies in a town that preferred quiet, a town that did not welcome upheaval. The rain had slowed now, leaving the forest damp but still. John closed the chest slowly, brushing his fingers over the oilskin as if sealing a promise. He knew the choice ahead was not just about opening an old mystery. It was about choosing whether to speak truth, even if it came at great cost. For the first time in a long while, John felt the stirrings of resolve. Compassion was not passive. It demanded action. And he knew deep down he could not ignore what lay in that chest. He lifted the chest, Duke stepping close, and set off down the forest path, each step heavier with the weight of history. Somewhere ahead lay a decision that would change everything, for him, for Pine Hollow, and for the truth itself. The rain had stopped, but Pine Hollow still felt heavy with tension when John Mercer carried the chest toward City Hall. His boots echoed softly against the worn wooden floors as he stepped inside, Duke trailing quietly behind him. Mayor Linda Carter was at her desk, her expression professional but guarded. John placed the chest before her and explained what he had found. He spoke slowly, carefully, as if the weight of the moment demanded precision. "This isn't just history," he said. "It's proof of a betrayal, something buried for over 100 years." Linda leaned back in her chair, studying him. After a long pause, she shook her head. "John, some truths are dangerous," she said softly. "Not everything needs to be brought to light. There are stories better left buried." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had hoped she would understand, hoped she would stand beside him. But instead, the mayor's dismissal left him unsettled. Without another word, he turned and left, the chest heavy in his hands. Outside, Duke stayed close, their steps echoing along the empty street. By the next morning, the news of John's discovery had spread. Whispers began in cafes and at gas stations. By noon, rumors were circulating through Pine Hollow like wildfire. Some called John a hero, a man uncovering a buried truth, fighting for justice. Others branded him a troublemaker, stirring unrest in a town that preferred peace over disruption. The divisions deepened quickly. People gathered at the square, talking in hushed tones. Social media lit up with heated debate. The air became thick with suspicion. John began receiving notes slipped under his door, strange phone calls, and cold stares when he passed through town. Some were encouraging, others were warnings. Duke sensed the change too, walking closer to John's side, his body tense. John began to question himself. Could he reveal the truth without tearing the town apart? The weight of the chest felt heavier now, filled with both history and the burden of choice. The doubt gnawed at him day after day. Every glance in town, every whispered comment felt like a reminder that he was at a crossroads. One night, the unease drove John into the forest again. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the air was damp and still. Duke walked silently beside him, nose to the ground, as though following an invisible thread. They arrived at the ruins of the collapsed cabin. John paused, the chest tucked under his arm, sensing something deeper calling him here. Duke stopped abruptly at the edge of the rubble, barking softly, urging John forward. Together they began to sift through the earth, hands and paws moving with quiet determination. Beneath the soil, they found something hidden, a weathered ledger, its leather binding cracked and faded. John's fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside were names, handwritten in careful script, listed alongside dates and locations. They told the names of those who had played a role in Caldwell's betrayal. And as John read, his stomach tightened. Many names belonged to families still living in Pine Hollow, respected families who shaped the town's history and influence. This was not simply a story from the past. This was a wound still living within the town's heart. John sank to his knees in the wet soil, Duke resting his head gently on his shoulder. The truth he had uncovered was heavier than the chest he carried. It could not be hidden again, but the question remained: how could it be shared without destroying the town? Then it hit him, sharp and clear, like lightning cutting through the darkness. Justice wasn't about revenge. Justice wasn't about tearing people apart. Justice was about healing. The truth could divide, but it could also unite, if it was shared with courage and care. John stood, holding the ledger to his chest. Duke looked up at him with steady, knowing eyes. For the first time since finding the chest, John felt certain. This was not just a choice about history. It was a choice about the future of Pine Hollow. And he knew what he had to do. John Mercer stood in the center of Pine Hollow's town square, the chest and ledger beside him. Duke sat faithfully at his side, ears perked, eyes steady. The morning air was cool, and a quiet crowd had gathered. Curious faces from every corner of the town, some drawn by rumor, others by something deeper, an unspoken need to understand. John cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, was steady but carried the weight of months of doubt and conflict. "This," he said, gesturing to the chest, "is more than history. It's a story we all share, a truth that has been buried too long. It belongs to all of us." Slowly, he opened the chest. The crowd leaned in, the chatter fading into a hush. Inside lay the worn diary, the maps, the letters, and the ledger John and Duke had uncovered. He placed them carefully on a wooden table set in the square. One by one, he shared what he had found: Samuel Caldwell's discovery, his betrayal, the hidden ledger with names of ancestors who had chosen silence over justice. The air shifted. There was shock as people realized that this was no ordinary story. It was their history. Tears glistened on some faces. Anger flared quietly in others. But beneath the emotions, there was something stronger: a tension, a collective turning of hearts toward a truth long ignored. The murmurs turned into conversation. Strangers spoke to strangers. Families gathered closer. Decades of silence began to crumble. Mayor Linda Carter stepped forward, her expression unreadable. For a moment, no one moved. Then she nodded. "This town cannot ignore its history any longer," she said softly. "We owe Caldwell that much." Her voice carried conviction, and it was enough to shift the mood. The murmurs became determined voices. In that moment, Pine Hollow began to transform. Committees were formed, plans were sketched. The ruined cabin site became more than a place of collapse. It became a symbol of remembrance. By the end of the week, volunteers were clearing the site, planting trees, and shaping a vision for a memorial park dedicated to Caldwell and his legacy. John watched quietly from the edge of the crowd, Duke resting beside him. For months he had carried the weight of the chest alone. Now the town carried it with him. And for the first time since he returned home, John felt something shift inside him. He had come back to Pine Hollow carrying invisible scars, carrying burdens that had no name. But now he felt something he had not felt in years: belonging. Not just because the town was rallying around a cause, but because he had been part of something greater. He had turned pain into purpose. Parents brought their children to the gathering. Neighbors shared their own family stories. The air felt lighter charged with a rare kind of hope. The collapsed cabin, once a forgotten ruin, was becoming a place of healing and remembrance. And John knew this was exactly what Caldwell would have wanted. Later, as the crowd dispersed, John stood alone in the square for a moment. He looked down at Duke, who gazed up at him with quiet understanding. There was no need for words. Duke had been with him every step of the way, through uncertainty, doubt, and the storm of conflict. John reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded page from Caldwell's diary. He read it silently, the words etched in his mind. Some truths can heal what lies broken, if we have courage to share them. He folded the page, placed it carefully back into the chest, and smiled faintly. The storm had passed. Pine Hollow would never be the same, and neither would he. In the weeks that followed, the town gathered to dedicate the new Caldwell Memorial Park. A simple stone plaque stood where the cabin once lay, and beneath it, the names of those who had fought for justice were etched into memory. John Mercer, once a quiet veteran with a heavy heart, had become something more. He was a keeper of truth, a bridge between past and future. And Pine Hollow would never forget the day a veteran and his dog discovered a collapsed cabin and uncovered a truth that shattered the town and rebuilt it in equal measure.